Today we're going to talk about the PowerPoint document that circulated among Trump administration officials outlining their plan to overthrow American democracy and the muted response that came from it. And I interview EPA Administrator Michael Regan about how he's insulating that department from the possibility of another administration like Trump's that's hostile to its mission, and whether the EPA is doing enough to combat climate change as we continue to feel its impacts. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. So, the Trump team circulated a PowerPoint with step-by-step directions to stage a coup. So that's what we're going to talk about, because one of the two political parties plotted to overturn the election results, and they made a literal PowerPoint about it, and that's not great. But what's also not great is the fact that it doesn't seem to be breaking through in the media or within the Democratic Party. And so because it's just baked in that Republicans are anti-democratic, it's somehow not newsworthy when there's written proof of it. And so I'm going to dedicate this monologue to it. The January 6th committee is now investigating a 36-page PowerPoint document entitled Election Fraud, Foreign Interference, and Options for 6 January that essentially outlines the plan to overturn the 2020 election, including instructions for Trump to declare a national emergency to delay the certification of the election results. The PowerPoint was circulated by a retired colonel, Phil Waldron, who reportedly met with Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, 8 to 10 times. Now, Meadows ultimately turned the PowerPoint over to the January 6th committee. Waldron also reportedly briefed a group of Republican senators on January 4th and a group of House Republicans on January 5th, which was, of course, the day before the insurrection on January 6th, which was an event with the sole intent of pressuring Republican officials not to certify the election results. Among the proposals listed in the PowerPoint were for Mike Pence to reject electors from states where fraud supposedly occurred, for Pence to replace those electors with Republican electors, and for Biden's certification to be delayed while U.S. Marshals and National Guards troops would secure ballots from so-called disputed states. So, pretty grim. A plan circulated within the cabinet, the shepherd of which met with the chief of staff a reported 8 to 10 times. And yet, here are some of the headlines that came from this. The New York Times headline was, January 6th committee examines PowerPoint document sent to Meadows. The Washington Post's was, election denier who circulated January 6th PowerPoint says he met with Meadows at White House. This was Trump's plan to overthrow American democracy. And the best we're getting right now, to alert the American people, is that an arbitrary PowerPoint is being examined. And look, it's not like we wouldn't know about Trump's crimes without this PowerPoint, and we have other evidence besides this PowerPoint that the president attempted to stage a coup, but that doesn't mean they get a pass when new evidence, damning evidence like this comes out. I understand that none of this is new, right? I understand that we all know what the Trump team was trying to do, that they did it out there in the open, that they broadcast it in broad daylight, that it's not surprising. But an administration, a political party being so corrupt that their crimes aren't surprising still doesn't mean that those crimes should be normalized. It doesn't mean that the justice system should go easier on them. It doesn't mean that we should report on it less. And that's what's happening right now. And granted, we don't know what the January 6th committee and the DOJ are doing behind the scenes, but I'll tell you this much, I wouldn't be surprised if nothing happened to Trump, and I know that a lot of you wouldn't be either. Now, in terms of the media, I would contend that I've only seen a minimal amount of reporting on this, which is especially fucking sad considering the United States prides itself on being this beacon of democracy for the world, and we're the closest we've been to that experiment ending, and it doesn't get as much coverage as a Christmas tree outside of Fox News' headquarters burning down. And so I'm going to try to have a nuanced take here. On one hand, yeah, I have beef with that coverage that I truly don't believe acknowledges the gravity of what's happening right now. I think I've made that abundantly clear. Now, on the other hand, there are no consequences for these kinds of actions, this kind of behavior. And so at the end of the day, there isn't really a huge incentive structure to cover this because so what? It's not like anyone has the balls to charge Trump, right? We've seen him on tape asking the Georgia Secretary of State to find 11,780 votes, exactly one more vote than he was losing by. Nothing happened. You steal a French fry from McDonald's and the cops will still come and arrest you. There's a justice system for that. But try to undermine a general election, try to stage a coup, to do it so shamelessly and overtly that you make a fucking PowerPoint presentation and the guy's planning his next run for president. So I think that there's been a systemic failure from top to bottom. And that's not to say that there still isn't time for accountability. And I know that the justice system isn't exactly built for speed in this country, but it's been pretty uninspiring watching this country navigate threats to its own existence. And at the end of the day, it's not really even about the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is ultimately further evidence of an effort to undo election results. Yes, that already happened, but also that's still ongoing. That's the issue. We didn't defeat authoritarianism. We escaped by the skin of our teeth thanks to just a very, very, very small handful of people. People like Mike Pence and Brad Raffensperger. People who've been duly purged and excommunicated from that party. Mike Pence has no future in the GOP. And so the issue becomes what we're doing about it now. Because as we speak, the guardrails that protected our democracy in 2020 are being systematically dismantled. There are voter suppression laws to depress turnout. There's partisan gerrymandering to predetermine Republican majorities in congressional districts. There are provisions like the one in Georgia allowing the Republican legislature to reorganize county election boards thanks to SB 202. In Spalding County, Georgia, 3 black Democrats on the Board of Elections were just replaced by 3 white Republicans, and the chairman of the board has endorsed Trump's stolen election claims. Republicans have already quietly reorganized 6 boards of election in Georgia so far. All of that is to say that we are running out of time. And look, yes, we need to pass legislation. I'm glad that we passed the American Rescue Plan. We owe hundreds of thousands of vaccinations to that legislation. I'm glad that we passed infrastructure. That's a historic investment in this country. I'm glad that we're on the brink of passing the Build Back Better Act. That'll likely be the most transformative piece of legislation of our lifetimes. But unless we want these to be the last pieces of legislation that we pass for the foreseeable future, Democrats need to wake up and start focusing on voting rights with even half of the focus and attention that Republicans have while they're stripping those things away. Pretending that everything is fine isn't going to make this problem go away. It's only leaving us woefully unprepared when its consequences are finally realized after the next election. And so I think that we need our elected officials, the media, everyone to acknowledge the existential threat that we're contending with right now, and to not treat this like politics as usual, to not be afraid of our own shadows, and to recognize that if we don't do something now, while we can, then we shouldn't act surprised when Republicans are successful in 2022 and 2024 where they failed in 2020. To listen to my interview with EPA Administrator Michael Regan about how he's insulating the department from the possibility of another administration like Trump's that's hostile to its mission, and whether the EPA is doing enough to combat climate change as we continue to feel its impacts, click the thumbnail right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel.